across an author and have loved their work so much that all you wanted to do was look and find more of their works to read because you've loved their writing so much? That happened to me and Elizabeth VonArnim. I've read 3 of Elizabeth VonArnim's books, and I wanted to share my thoughts on each of these books because they are vastly different. And that is one of the reasons why I love Elizabeth VonArnim, is because if you've only read one of her works that she's had published, you really haven't gotten a feel for the full diversity and breadth of work that Elizabeth VonArnim has shown herself to be capable of. So the first book that I want to talk about is her first to be published book, and that is Elizabeth and Her German Garden. It feels very much like a memoir, and there is some stinging comments in there and things that I think potentially could have caused some trouble for Elizabeth in her personal life. This was published in 1898, and while Elizabeth shows a wonderfully engaging sense of humor in describing curmudgeonly gardeners, calling her children by their birth names. So she's got April, May, and June. Those are her babies and their names. And she actually describes her June baby, who is the youngest, as 2 feet square, which you can really imagine like this very solidly built baby. And with her children, she actually talks about how when they weren't being engaged by the nanny or by her, they were busy taking little pieces of newspaper and putting them into their ears, and they needed tweezers to take them out. So lots of humor and kind of slice of life, what it's like to be Elizabeth in her life, sense of humor. So as this is, as I mentioned, kind of a memoir style, we have Elizabeth in her life in a manor, in a place of wealth in the German countryside. It's so much in the country that she says everybody has to stay healthy because the only doctor around is a cow doctor. You get the feeling that she is living a bit of a life of leisure. She talks about having staff and having people there to care for her children and also to care for the outdoor parts of the property. So she obviously, in this time in her life, had money. She's married, her husband comes in and out of the story, but it very much is a memoir. She does this in an epistolary style where she is writing a diary that goes from May until the end of winter the following year. So not quite a year. And within this garden that she loves so much, she actually talks about having a budget for clothes. And instead of using that budget for clothes, she uses that budget for seeds and for other plants that she wants to plant in this garden. Now, as a side note, she had people like E.M. Forrester who came to be a tutor to their children at their house. And the recollection of these tutors that had come to her house was that the garden wasn't this like pristine, orderly garden. It was very haphazard and wild feeling. And I love that for Elizabeth and really can picture that as she's describing her discussions with the gardener about how she wants the plants lined up and how they end up doing it. So something to note is one of her sources of frustration in this is that her gardener has to be the one to do all the digging. So again, she's living the life of a lady of leisure. She's not actually permitted to get down on her hands and knees and dig in her own garden. My, how far we've come. Thank heavens. She does have those kinds of frustrations, but she's very in the details of what plants, where, how, all of that. I wanted to read a little bit of the writing that she does. So in this, she talks about making cowslip balls. I looked it up. There's these beautiful like floral balls that you get and kind of hang as decoration. And she talked about this forest that's behind their property called the Hirschwald, a little open wood of silver birches and springy turf starred with flowers. And there is a tiny stream meandering amiably about it and decking itself in June with yellow flags. I have dreams of having a little cottage built there with the daisies up to the door and no path of any sort, just big enough to hold myself and one baby inside. 2 rooms, a bedroom and a kitchen. How scared we would be at night and how completely happy by day. She also has lovely prose about winter. It was a hoarfrost day and the forest was an enchanted forest leading into fairyland. And though Iris and I have been there often before and always thought it beautiful, yet yesterday we stood under the final arch of frosted trees, struck silent by the sheer loveliness of the place. As we passed through the neighboring village with crackling of whip and jingling of bells, heads popped up at the windows to stare, and the only living thing in the silent, sunny street was a melancholy fowl with ruffled feathers, which looked at us reproachfully as we dashed with so much energy over the crackling snow. So while this does have beautiful prose, I would say that the first half of this book is very charming. I found myself thinking about Elizabeth and her daily life and what must it be like to have someone else kind of running the garden, and the humor, and being able to really kind of compare it to a life that I would imagine in a fictional book. However, the second half of this book really has a bite to it. So around Christmas time, Elizabeth and her husband and family end up with two guests. They end up with Iris, who is a friend of Elizabeth's. Elizabeth talks in the first half of the book about really not being able to handle having people coming and visit too much. They can come for a little bit, but then she's ready for them to leave. But Iris is one that she really does seem to like and doesn't mind to come for a longer visit. Iris's husband is sick, and she doesn't really want to deal with it, so she leaves him at home with the nurse, and she comes and stays with Elizabeth and her family. And then Elizabeth's friend writes and says, could you host this young English girl named Minora? So Minora from England comes and stays at this German manor with Elizabeth and her family, her children, her husband, and whatever staff they have, and Iris. It really does get serious quickly. There is sort of this feeling between Iris and Elizabeth that Minora is kind of irritating, to be honest. And so we kind of see them almost ganging up on Minora and like having their own kind of secrets and kind of baiting Minora. And so that part feels a little bit unkind. But they do, the three women, have a discussion with Elizabeth's husband, who she affectionately calls Man of Wrath in this, about feminism. And it's a very difficult and harsh reality that we're kind of dropped right into. Again, we're kind of going along like, this is life, how wonderful, she's a lady of leisure, into all that's wrong with the German and maybe European system in that time for how women are treated and what their expectations are. And it's pretty jarring and heavy hitting. And then lastly, this gets into a pretty deep analysis of Russian immigrant workers who were coming to Germany to work during a specific season. They had families at home that they were sending money to. They were having to then, at the end of the season, travel all the way back to Russia, which was a long trip and very costly. This part of German history, which I actually was not familiar with, of having these Russian immigrants come, and kind of Elizabeth's perspective on the immigrants and what their life must be like, was pretty intriguing, and again, a bit jarring and eye-opening. So if you are interested in like memoir style books and epistolary diary style novels that are set, again, she wrote this was published in 1898, so right at the turn of the century, kind of want to get a feel for what life was like, but then also, again, examine Elizabeth's writing style from a different perspective than Enchanted April, then I would recommend giving this a try. Next, Vera is not at all like Elizabeth and her German garden or the sequel. And it is not at all like the Enchanted April. It's so different. So the interesting thing about Vera is that it is thought that Daphne DuMarier, who wrote Rebecca, was inspired by Vera to write Rebecca. So in Vera, we have a deceased first wife who ends up really impacting the life of the second wife. And Vera is the name of the first wife. So Vera was published in 1921, so over 20 years after Elizabeth and her German garden. And between this time in Elizabeth's real life, her first husband, the Man of Wrath, had passed away. Elizabeth VonArnim ended up marrying a second man, and apparently the second marriage was disastrous. And so there is that tie between Vera and this in it feeling it could be a little bit memoir-esque, but I really don't think that was the intent. I think she was very good at kind of that sarcastic, biting language, which we did see in here, where she was really kind of zinging her second husband in this. But I think this was created entirely from Elizabeth's imagination. At least I hope it was. So in Vera, we have really three main characters. We have Miss Dorothy Entwistle, who is Aunt Dot, and we have Lucy Entwistle, who is the aunt's niece. And we have Everand Weymouth. And at the opening of Vera, we meet Lucy. Lucy's father has passed away, and Everand is just kind of traveling by. It's just by happenstance that they end up talking at all. And it turns out that when he meets Lucy, he discovers that she's distraught and sad about her father's death. And he kind of starts to share, well, he's also grieving. He has lost his wife. And he shares his name reticently because apparently his name has been in the news. And Lucy kind of recognizes it, and she realizes that his wife having passed away, there were kind of these like questionable circumstances. But Everand is adamant that, he doesn't know why his name has been in the news. There's no issues. It shouldn't be a problem. So Lucy and Everand really connect. They start talking, and Lucy's aunt comes around and she meets Everand, and she has concerns. It seems like things are progressing really fast. But Lucy really kind of squashes her aunt's concerns and continues to be courted by Everand. Everand's personality reminds me so much of what you read about with the narcissist who does love bombing. He really just showers Lucy with kindness and compliments, and it's really like odd too. He like treats her very much like a child. It's just very odd. As you can imagine, with already knowing that this was the inspiration, potentially, for Rebecca, Lucy marries Everand. They go on a honeymoon, and he brings her back to the Willows, which is a mansion where Vera met her demise. And at this point is when we see the infantilism of Everand, in that we really start to see very childish behavior. Like, it's his birthday and he wants a big celebration. He wants the whole day to be about the fact that it's his birthday and wanting all of the attention. And Lucy is so young, and again, she's been love bombed for months. She's been on this honeymoon. She continues to act the same way, where she's like responding, but she starts to have these kinds of thoughts of realizing that his behavior might not be normal. And she's being asked to be in the same bedrooms where Vera's rooms are. Like, she's in her library with her fire. And so it just becomes very creepy. Not that Vera herself is necessarily like haunting the place so much as it's the memory of her and just seeing all of her things. Like, Lucy's going through her books and asking questions about her life. And again, we're just seeing Everand just devolve from this kind, loving, attentive husband into causing Lucy to be in basically intellectual and emotional servitude. She is at the mercy and whims of Everand, and he is really kind of psychotic about, for instance, the piano. It has to be covered up. He has to have everything exactly the way that he wants it. And if it's not, then he just makes it miserable for Lucy, for the staff. It's just really awful. Lucy gets really sick, so her aunt comes down to kind of take care of her. Everand leaves. He doesn't really even seem to care. And this book does not end in a way where you're like, okay, Lucy will be fine. When the book ends, you're like, things are not good. This did not resolve well. You continually feel like Lucy has made the worst decision of her life. You can't really see any way out of it, and it ends very abruptly. So if you're looking for reading something that kind of has that gothic, creepy feel, it's not super long. You should be able to read it like in a foggy, rainy fall weekend. This would be a perfect choice. And again, so very different from the memoir of Elizabeth and her garden, as well as Enchanted April. Elizabeth VonArnim is most known for the Enchanted April. This book is very well known. There are multiple publications of it, as well as a movie that's been produced. So this is the work of art for which she has received the most acclaim.
The Enchanted April is the story of 4 women who are strangers to one another, but nonetheless agree to sublet an Italian medieval castle for the entire month of April. Each woman has different reasons for why she's really enthralled with this idea of subletting the mansion for a month. While we're introduced to each of them in very intriguing ways, we are slowly given more and more information as to why not only were they drawn to this idea, but it also has the potential to be a healing, cathartic experience for them. So we first meet Lottie Wilkins. Mrs. Wilkins is sitting in a club reading a newspaper, and she sees an ad, and this advertisement, she cannot let go of it. And she notices another woman nearby who she doesn't know, but she has seen before in church, who is also reading this same ad. And that is Mrs. Rose Arbuthnot. These 2 women, again, never having spoken before, one of whom recognizes the other, but Rose does not recognize Lottie, agree that they are going to, unbeknownst to their husband, use some of their nest egg to be able to pay to let this medieval castle. Through the process, however, they decide that it probably would go better if they could split it 4 ways instead of 2. And so they end up including Lady Caroline Dester and a Mrs. Fisher. Again, each of them have different reasons for traveling to Italy from the dreariness of a London in March. But once they arrive, we see their quirky personalities come out in full force. This is such an intriguingly written book in that not only is it multiple POV, we actually get the point of view of almost every character that we meet. So not only are we inside the minds and thoughts of each of these 4 women, but also the staff that are there to help. We kind of get into their motivations and their backgrounds a little bit. We get into the motivations of the women's husbands, as well as the gentleman who owns the medieval castle. And so we're really kind of given this interesting perspective of knowing what everyone is thinking, even though that's not what everyone is saying. The development of this scenario in this setting in the Italian countryside is phenomenal. I also really love how Elizabeth VonArnim uses flowers throughout this entire book. She marks the passing of time with different flowers that are blooming and then fading. When we have peak seasons of certain kinds of flowers, the scent of other flowers coming across on the wind, letting us know that more time has passed and there is change coming. Even the end of this book ends on the scent of a flower that these 4 women are able to take with them back into their lives in London. Something I love about the female writers in the early 1900s is that they add in a spiritual element. There is whimsical elements. There is magical realism. There seem to be characters that just have a sense of something and they just know something, or they have visions. And this book has a character in there that is like that. And I just love the magic and the fantasy of having a character like that in a book that maybe you would just see as a classic novel or even potentially historical fiction. But bringing that whimsy in just makes my heart happy. What I will say about this book is there are potential triggers. I think they're very light. I think VonArnim does a good job of letting us know what's happening without actually being overt about it. So she has very subtle ways of wording things. Again, I think that's the time period in which she's writing, as well as the plot devices that she is using in this novel. I actually had to go back a little bit near the end to make sure I understood what actually was going on, because it was so subtle. I also think she put in some plot lines of people really kind of seeking family. And so they wanted that family connection. A couple of the women there wanted children but did not have children. And so they expressed that desire. And then we had a few characters that expressed a desire of having a motherly figure in their life. And so I really was looking for those two desires to converge within this plot. And I really feel like VonArnim ended this so quickly that I think it could have been actually longer and connected that together a little bit better in order to make a more robust and deep character arc throughout that for every character. So I think for the most part, if you read a book and you're really feeling like, gosh, I wish I could have stayed in that setting a little bit longer. I wish I could have gotten to know that character a little bit longer. I wish I could have seen that character develop a little bit more instead of kind of having this rushed ending. I think means that it ultimately is a really great book. I really enjoyed my reading experience of this. I did a day of reading it vlog, and so I'll be sure to link that here. But if you are interested in reading a book that unpacks female motivation and is about women and men really getting a solid self-awareness of consequences of why they make the decisions that they do, how they've ended up on the path that they're on. This is a beautiful examination of that, and the writing in it is just lovely. There are some lyrical passages. There are descriptions that really immerse you into that Italian countryside setting. You can really picture how the castle is laid out and how each woman has chosen the spots that they have. And it's just really phenomenal. I will say the lyrical writing is not so overwhelming. I know sometimes when there's overly descriptive writing that can be detracting, or some people really don't like that. I don't think that's what's in here. I really do think it is about reading it and picturing yourself in that setting, and that's what Elizabeth VonArnim does with her descriptions. Now that I have finished this, I am off to watch the movie. I believe it was produced in the 1990s, early 1990s, and it also gets really great reviews. If you've read Elizabeth VonArnim, please let me know below. Let me know if you have any additional thoughts to share. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time.